Hello everyone, welcome to the Jewish Week Online. We're here the Jewish Funk team at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale for a special Yom HaShoah Seder. This event is an interactive Seder to help educate the community at large about what the Jews went through in the Holocaust. Let's take a closer look. Yom HaShoah is a difficult subject to bring a community together sometimes. And, as survivors go through this process with us, it's sometimes hard to look back, but it's important to come together to retell the story. What is your perspective and the best way to educate the future about the Holocaust?
Well, for Yom HaShoah, I believe the best way is through ritual. There is nothing in Jewish history that is remembered long term without ritual. We remember the Exodus from Egypt only because it's been ritualized. We remember the Purim story because it's part of our ritual. And long term, I think the test of Shoah memory is going to be ritual. Ritual that brings together generations. This evening was an evening of ritual. It was an evening of sipur, of telling the story. There's nothing more powerful than telling the story. And to see the survivors coming forward and for their testimony to be read by youngsters who had been speaking with them, and the way they walked up hand in hand and the way they embraced after they offered the testimony was really a testimony to the coming together of the generations, the handing of the torch, making sure that the next generation and the next generation never ever forgets.
And one of the things that, this is my second year coming to this amazing Seder, is that, when the children are separated and you're taking off your shoes, like you're now experiencing it. You can go on different trips, but when you actually experience it yourself, it's a different experience.
Well, the genius of ritual, for example, the Passover Seder, is that we not only remember the Exodus, but we reenact it. We reenact the slavery, and then we reenact the freedom. And taking from that concept, that's what we've attempted to do here. We remember certain moments and gain a tiny, tiny glimpse of what it was like by eating the potato peels, by having numbers placed on our hands, by taking off our shoes and jewelry, by having the children separate from their parents. And so we try to reenact, and by reenacting it, it's integrated into one's being, into one's very, very soul.
What do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years of Holocaust education? Obviously, we spoke a little about, they're not going to be around for much longer, unfortunately. What have you seen the most effective ways to tell the story about what the Jews went through?
Well, it is, from my perspective, it's to tell the story and to tell it through Jewish ritual. It's going back to the basics. It's listening to the survivors, and the survivors are getting older, and we're all getting older. We have here at the Bayit a survivor luncheon on the Shabbat before Yom HaShoah, and we normatively have well over 50 people attend, and yesterday there were less than 20 who were there. Everyone's growing older. And the test of memory is, as survivors become older, will the second generation and third generation remember? The test of Yom HaShoah is not if the survivors are present. It's not only if their children are present. Does all of Am Yisrael recognize that they are survivors? It was Simon Wiesenthal who once said, we're all survivors. There were the survivors who were there, and then there were survivors who were not there because his intent, Oto Aish, was to murder all Jews. When we think about Egypt, it's not just the direct, who are the people who remember the Exodus of Egypt? It's all of Am Yisrael, and the Shoah, which goes beyond Egypt, it's only going to be remembered if all of Am Yisrael, the whole of the Jewish people, remembers. The test of the Yom HaShoah program is not only how many older people are there, how many seniors, but how many younger people are there. Younger people intergenerationally interacting with older people. I remember once we were out in Cleveland and we were protesting against Demjanjuk, who had come back to Cleveland. And there was a man, Bob Birnbaum, now of blessed memory, and he stood in front of Demjanjuk's home, and he rolled up his sleeve. And at that time, much of Cleveland and Seven Hills was saying that he was the victim, that Demjanjuk was victimized by the Israeli court system. And he looked towards his door and he said, "You think you're the victim? I'm the victim." And he showed his numbers, and a journalist turned to him and at that moment said to him, "But Mr. Birnbaum, what will you do? Who is going to say what you said when you're gone?" And at that moment, there was a young woman, a high school student, Devorah Pomerantz from Bet Sefer Mizrahi. She jumped forward and she said,
Wow.
"I'll offer the testimony." That's what we saw tonight, and that's the test of Shoah memory.
Just as the Haggadah provides the eternal framework for each of us to experience the Exodus from Egypt, so too a ritual for remembering the Holocaust, the greatest catastrophe that ever befell the Jewish people, is needed to transform Yom HaShoah from a day in which we are spectators to one in which we feel like participants. Until now, we have relied on the survivors of the Holocaust, the eyewitnesses, to tell their stories. On Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, we listen to the testimony of the survivors with even greater attention and reverence in order to absorb what they have endured in every fiber of our being.
In memory of their parents, Rachel and Marcus Berger, and Nurit Barak and Ilana Herman, will light the same candle in memory of their dear mother, Manzi Friedman.
Certain moments, the whole country comes to a standstill. After a siren is heard, theaters close, people get out of their cars, everybody stops what they're doing to take a moment of reflection, just a moment to remember.
The pain of the loss of opportunities for learning, we take a sheet imprinted with the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph Bet, symbolic of our Torah, and rip it in half. We place the torn pages in the center of our circle, and you can place them in front of you as well, and set them on fire. As in the story of the 10 martyrs, the parchment burns, but the letters ascend toward heaven.
Noble Fleury is an artist. She paints about her childhood memories, life before World War II, with her family and her experiences during the Holocaust. Bobby was born and grew up on a farm in a rural village named Czernica in eastern Poland. Her father's family had been there for generations. This is my Bubby at the age of 5. Bubby could never forget the day when she and her family arrived to the Brody ghetto. She saw people, skin and bones, lying in the street, in the hallways and begging for food. The Gentiles used to come to the barbed wire borders of the ghetto to sell bread and potatoes at outrageous prices. There were very few who could purchase the food, and if the German guard saw the transaction, he would take away the food and beat up the poor soul.
Came into our city in 1941, a ghetto was formed. Everyone was cramped into the ghetto. Our building had a shtibel with services, and we observed kashrut. We were deported to an area in Verkhovka, a labor camp in Transnistria. in Ukraine. We would stay there for almost 3 years. 500 people were crammed into the transport, and we traveled by train to the very end of the train line.
Yom HaShoah means something different to everyone, but it's really a unique opportunity to have a community experience, and what the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale does is unique. Tell us a little bit about the Seder.
One of the key points of the Seder is bringing old and young together, and so it's a participatory Seder, something that we're trying to ritualize and repeat every year, much like we do for the Pesach Seder. And just like the Pesach Seder, it's a time for everybody to gather together to not only reflect and remember, but to participate in the rituals. And so we reenact what some of the experiences of the survivors may have been. It's hard for us today to really understand what that was, but we eat potato peels, we take off our jewelry and our shoes. Children are separated from their parents because these are the experiences that the survivors and those who perished experienced. And so it's a evening of song, of Hebrew songs, of Yiddish songs, of readings, of poetry, much of the poetry that was collected and found from the war, written by survivors or those who perished in the war. And the key is the testimonies, and the survivors are interviewed by high school students, and then the students repeat their testimony. And the point is that it's now our turn. It's our turn to not only hear the stories, but to retell the stories and pass those stories on to others.
And the idea of like the door, especially during these times when unfortunately survivors we're losing them, and those stories are important to continue. And the way that the Seder is sort of brought together and really showing that it's almost like handing a torch and saying, now you have to tell our story. What do you think is the biggest challenge in trying to educate the future about the Holocaust?
Our lives are so different. We're so blessed. We're so lucky today. It's very hard to relate to what those before us went through. And we can only try. We can only try by listening, by reading, and by conveying those stories to our children. It's hard to think about how my children are not really going to know so many survivors. And I've been doing this program for 5 years now, and finding survivors to participate is getting more and more difficult. So now's the time. It's just imperative for us to sit at the feet, literally, of our survivors and hear their stories, and then tell them to our children, and in the hope that they tell them to their children. I would say that the Seder is also key, because when you ritualize something, you repeat it over and over and over again, and that's really the point of the Yom HaShoah Seder, so that in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, this ritual will continue to be said and repeated by the future.
As you can see, it was a really meaningful event. This is Aaron Herman, and thank you for watching.